Okay, so in this section, I'm just going to talk about the personality tests and personality testing. In the first video, I went over the psychodynamic and the psychoanalytic perspectives of psychology, and this section will go into the trait theories and the different tests. So to start with, this kind of follows up from the psychoanalytic and the psychodynamic perspective. These two styles of personality tests are called projective tests. A projective test would be a style of test where you do this type of free association, similar free association to kind of like how Freud was having someone just talk about anything. So this is really similar, a projective test, but what's different though is that there is an ambiguous object where you talk about an object, and so you project your thoughts and your feelings onto an object. And so the hope is that the psychologist could sift through the different themes of your story, and then they can tell different factors about you through the themes that you were sharing in your story. So a projective test is rather than doing like a multiple choice set and answering questions about yourself, you're not talking about yourself. You're telling a story about an image, or you're talking about something you see, and so you're coming up with your own responses to some kind of ambiguous image. So the first one is a Rorschach test, which you're probably familiar with ink blots. This was made by Hermann Rorschach, and he put together a series of ink blots that could resemble any kind of image, and they are ambiguous in that there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, and so he would have people respond to these images by just answering the question, what do you see, and describe this picture. And so based on the themes of what they said, he could sift out different things about their personality traits. And he tested this over and over and over with many, many, many different people to try to find commonalities in their answers. And so today the Rorschach test is not used in the way that Hermann Rorschach would have used it. And today it's just not, it's not what it was when he used it. But the purpose when he created it was to pull out personality themes and traits, and not necessarily traits, but connections based on what they said. So the next one is the thematic apperception test, or the TAT test, and this is very, very similar. And there's all different kinds of images that can be used for the thematic apperception test, but it's just typically an image that you might have two figures or one figure, or you might have a possible ambiguous conflict. And through your story, you will have to talk about what you see, or the relationship between the people, and what's going on, and you would tell the storyline of what you see, and through your discussion of what you see, the hope would be to pull out themes. And so those are called projective personality tests. Those would be very in line with the ideas of a psychoanalytic or a psychodynamic approach. The next test is the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory Test. This would be a very objective standardized test, meaning that this is an empirically derived test. The questions are standardized. They have been tested over many groups of people. The test questions have been sifted through to pick out the best test questions that give the most appropriate answers, that are distinguishing the factors that they want to pull out. This particular test, the MMPI, is specifically a clinical personality test. So this is not a test that we took in class. We took some trait tests in class that are online. You'll not find this one online because it's a clinical personality test. The purpose of this test is to pull out abnormal psychology or abnormal personality traits that that would need some kind of maybe intervention or some therapy. And so this would be used in that type of setting, and this would not be considered like an online test that you would take to find out a personality type or anything like that. The MMPI is the purpose is for a clinical test. Okay. Next is the Myers-Briggs. The Myers-Briggs test is an inventory style test where you're going to get some kind of personality type back that's going to say something about your traits. This was created by two women who were not psychologists, Myers and Briggs, but they created it off of the concept of extroversion, Carl Jung's concept of extroversion, and being extroverted or not very extroverted. And so they took this and they created this test. So one criticism of the test is it's not necessarily evidence-based or scientifically um, like followed up with scientific evidence, but it's been used many times by many different people. People really enjoy it for like leadership training, job placement, things like that. But you're likely not going to take a Myers-Briggs test from a psychologist. This is more for, you know, finding out preferences or leadership skills or things like that. Okay. Costa and McRae, they came up with 5 traits that they feel like are very enduring, and that these traits can be identified through all people, but on kind of like a scale. So I remember the big 5 because I use the acronym OCEAN, but you can also use the acronym CANOE. The 5 traits are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so each trait would be kind of like on a sliding scale. When you would take the test, you would find out, are you, or how open are you? Maybe you're very open to new experiences, or maybe you're not very open to new experiences. And so kind of like this sliding scale, your trait would be, how open are you to new experiences? And same thing, conscientiousness, are you very conscientious and careful to detail, or are you not very conscientious and kind of relaxed and not careful to detail? Extroversion, are you very extroverted or are you introverted? Are you agreeable or are you disagreeable? Are you neurotic and high strung or are you not? And so these traits are on a just kind of a scale, how open or not are you, and so forth. So that is the big 5. Type A and type B personality type also fit in with this section about stress that's in the emotion unit. But these 2 personality types are kind of linked in with this idea of stress. And so a type A personality type would be someone who is very competitive, is very goal-oriented, very driven, but also just this kind of high-strung, more high stress personality type, where a type B person would be go with the flow, relaxed, easygoing, and more associated with low stress. And so with the type A and type B personality, they bring in this discussion of stress, and that the more stressed you are or high strung, and possibly type A, the more exposed you are to stress, the more likely you might be have heart disease or stress-related illness. Now, this is also criticized because it is a correlation and it's not necessarily a causation. And so there can be all kinds of factors linked in with this. But there is a connection between stress and stress-related illness. And so that's why they bring that in with type A and type B personality. Okay, there's one little bit left. There are some terms at the end of the section that start with self or deal with the self. And so I'll just quickly define these for you, maybe make them a little bit easier. I think self-efficacy and self-esteem are easily confused. Self-esteem kind of, if you think of like thinking of your self-worth, whereas self-efficacy is more of a performance. How confident are you in your abilities? Self-serving bias would be when you tend to view yourself in a favorable light. You're biased towards yourself. A self-fulfilling prophecy would be how you believe about yourself is how you will be. So if you believe you're going to do poorly on a test, the self-fulfilling prophecy says you're likely not going to do well. And so what you think about yourself, you tend to carry out. And so if you believe you'll do well, then you often perform better. And so you live up to your expectation for yourself. The spotlight effect is this idea that we tend to feel like we have a spotlight on ourselves when we don't. So we tend to think that people are always watching us or observing us or noticing us or critiquing us when in the reality they're not, or not as much as we think they are. One experiment done with this, they had people wearing a shirt that made them feel uncomfortable, and they they purposely wanted the person to feel uncomfortable wearing that t-shirt. And so when they took that person out of the setting and they asked them, how did you feel, the people reported feeling uncomfortable, that people were looking at them and judging them and whatnot. And then when they asked the people in the room, no one in the room noticed that this person was wearing that shirt. And so the idea is that you tend to overestimate how much people notice you, and you tend to overestimate how much they're judging and watching you. Okay, so that was a really quick summary of traits, personality testing, and the selves. I hope it was helpful.